areas. So I was just going to start by taking you from the very top, or near the top anyways. So this ARPA is what I'd like to call it from here on out, is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It was signed in March of this year. It's $1.9 trillion throughout the country to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. It allocated billions of dollars to public health, vaccines, assistance of vulnerable populations, education, housing, economic recovery, and direct assistance to families and individuals across the country. It also provides direct aid to cities and counties. Counties receive direct aid, and in the case of Middlesex County that we're in, it's not really a functioning county, and so we would just receive that money directly on behalf of the county. And then cities with populations below 50,000 receive funds based on the jurisdiction's percentage of state population, not exceeding 75% of its most recent budget. The funding that we receive from this program is available to use through the end of 2024. So if you look at those formulas, we received a direct municipal allocation of $2,476,667, and our county reallocation for Middlesex was $4,596,66. So we have $7 million to work with, which is, as I mentioned, it's an important and exciting opportunity. So I met with the board last night, the select board, and they established a process for how we're going to allocate this funding. What we did was we did an internal needs assessment. We talked to many stakeholders, and we presented that last night. And then the board is going to hold a public comment period for the next month, actually 29 days now, because it started yesterday. And we asked people to submit comments in writing through an emails to the select board address at sb@actonma.gov, or we've also created an online survey, which there's a link here. You can't really click on it, but there's also, we put a news flash out this afternoon with a direct link to how to access the survey. So, and then I'm here tonight presenting the priorities in a few moments for the Finance Committee to give its initial feedback on, and then I'd invite you to continue to provide feedback to the Select Board over the next few weeks. So here's what the process kind of on a arrow. The Select Board last night, Finance Committee tonight. The Select Board is holding a portion of their meeting next Monday night as a listening session. This is something that they did with the goal setting this year, where they just had an open item that said, residents, or anyone, come to the mic and tell us what you think about the needs assessment that we've already seen, or any ideas that you have. Give us, give the board feedback. And so that's scheduled for next Monday night. And then there's another meeting scheduled for October 4th, where the board, at that time, we hope there would be significant community input already received by then, hopefully from the Finance Committee, from several other boards and committees, and the survey, and the Select Board will take a first look at the initial feedback. And then leading into the October 18th meeting, the board will be considering a recommendation from me, working with the Select Board, for how to invest the $7 million using all the ideas and feedback received over this 1 month period. So what can the funding be used for? The main categories: public health response, replacing public sector revenue, water and sewer infrastructure, addressing negative economic impacts, providing premium pay for essential workers, and broadband infrastructure. Those are the high-level categories, and there's several subcategories. I'm going to talk about a few of the subcategories here, just to give you a better sense of what types of investments this program is intended to target. So under public health response, that's for things like vaccine clinics, things related to contact tracing, quarantining costs, and building capacity to provide public health services. Behavioral health is also part of public health response. That's mental health and substance misuse, crisis intervention, and related mental health services. If you look at replacing public sector revenue loss, which is something I'd like to talk to the Finance Committee about later on, that was put into this plan to ensure continuity of government services. Revenue loss is calculated, and then using a formula provided by the Treasury, you can use so much of the revenue loss to support current operations or other needs. Addressing negative economic impacts. This is something similar to what we've been doing, helping families with childcare, supporting unemployed workers, small business loans, small business grants, programs to help develop business growth in communities. And then there's also an idea of tourism, travel, and promoting some of the hospitality sector, which really suffered in the pandemic. And then rebuilding staff capacity. Another item is premium pay for essential workers. This is, I think, really focused on low-wage workers that work throughout, picture your grocery clerks, folks that were out there working every day. And we obviously had people working in our public safety, our employees were out working every day, but there are a lot of people that are in really low-paying jobs that were out there too. And I think that that's what this was really focused on. Water and sewer infrastructure, that's pretty straightforward, investing in municipal infrastructure related to providing water service or removing wastewater. There's also a focus on equity, mental health, health disparities in different communities based on equity, educational disparities, promoting healthy childhood environments, access to education and care and child care. Broadband, that's really focused on last mile connections. Many communities across the country don't have the broadband and internet services that we have here in Acton, and this is a way for them to make investments to get households and neighborhoods online. There's also some things that aren't eligible. You're not able to use this funding to lower taxes. You can't put it into a stabilization fund and use it someday. You can't use it to pay off your pension liabilities. There's other restrictions as well, but you can't build streets and bridges and roads. So with those rules as the framework that we get from the Treasury, we looked at our needs as an organization, and we have a lot of information right in front of us to help with that. We have the select board goals, which, as I mentioned, was a very inclusive and community-based process this year. So that's a really good gauge of what the community's priorities are. And there's 17 items on the short-term and long-term goals that we really focused on as we looked at how this funding could be invested. We also just completed a 10-year capital planning process. And in that, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of projects and programs that we have ideas how we would fund in the future, but having a resource like this would certainly help accelerate some of those projects. So that's, we looked that plan over to see any opportunities there. We also had an internal working group, which was representative of all the departments in the organization, and we made sure we understood any emerging needs from those groups. And then we reached out to stakeholders in the community. We reached out to the Acton-Boxborough School District and understood what needs that they have related to eligible programs. We talked to the Water District, and we tried to also accommodate and think of the Housing Authority, although we did not make a direct solicitation of what their needs may be. So that was a long process, and from that we identified a list of 43 priority investments. And as I mentioned, there is $7 million, and just in that stakeholder and needs assessment process, we identified $12 million worth of needs, which isn't a surprise. But that's not, that's sort of how the process goes, is we identify all the needs, and first of all, make sure that they're all eligible, and then we prioritize them, and then figure out how to make it fit into $7 million. And in the meantime, the Select Board is committed to taking additional feedback from the public on any other ideas that folks may have. So I'm just going to run through the 43 projects quickly, and then if you want to ask questions about them at the end, that's the end of the presentation pretty much. Under revenue replacement, these are the identified needs. In the FY21 budget, there was a shortfall in the local receipts category, which is, we talked about this this spring or late spring, early summer, and we could replace the revenue of $400,000 to deliver services in FY22. And that's something that I'd like to talk to the Finance Committee about in more detail after I go through the rest of the list. There's a need to convert the Asa Parliament House into a cultural center, and it's going to be a project that we're seeking community preservation funding support, but having a resource like this to supplement and complement that, I think would be a good investment. The school district is looking to make upgrades to their telephone system, which would be eligible under this category. There's a need there's a consideration for replacing revenue that was lost in kindergarten and extended day last year. There are needs for accessibility improvements to Narrow Park, including replacing the damaged wooden boardwalk that goes across the pond. There's always a need to add funding to acquire open space. There's sustainability initiatives that could be pursued, such as constructing solar and making energy efficiency improvements to buildings, and EV pilot programs for public safety. And then we want to continue to support virtual and hybrid meetings, because I think that even though we may not need to, I think many people found it very valuable to provide that as an option. So we want to incorporate that into the next few years of operations. Related to water, sewer, and broadband, one project that we've been thinking about is connecting sewer to the new proposed housing authority project, the senior housing at 364 Main Street. We're still doing a feasibility study for what that exactly would cost, and a very high-level budget estimate would be $2 million. I think it would be less, but that's what we put in for now until we know more. There's a need to make stormwater improvements on the Fort Pond Brook. It's currently impounded by a dam called the River Street Dam. So we'd like to make some investments there. The local rapid recovery program, this is a plan that is actually, we published it yesterday or today on our website. This is a grant-funded program to help us figure out how to revitalize Great Road. And one of the 5 recommendations in there are to provide sewer to the businesses on Great Road. And so this would be funding to pursue that through a feasibility study. The Acton Water District is replacing all their water mains when we do Kelly's Corner, the $20 million worth of infrastructure, and they asked for some support in some of the water main replacement costs. There's also a very small section of Quarry Road that is off the grid, and so that would be an opportunity to invest in providing broadband utility services to the full extent of Quarry Road. Economic impacts, addressing the economic impacts. We feel that an online permitting system that works well for businesses would really help businesses get closer to open when they want to come to town and when they want to make improvements to their properties. Having an online system, which most communities have, would be an economic help. There's a need to make some streetscape and parking improvements along Mass Ave and incorporate into the improvements that are proposed and planned for the Gardner Field. We're planning to build a playground, redo the playground and build a parking lot there. And so additional funding is needed to make that project, to complete that project. There's work underway to construct a dog park at the site next to the housing authority, and there's also a need and a desire from the select board to create a recreation amenity in between the senior housing and the dog park. So this funding, P16, could be used to design and construct that community recreation facility and make that all designed and looked like it was meant to be together. 17 is providing forgivable loans to make it more cost-effective for residents and businesses to implement energy efficiency upgrades to their properties. 18 is, again, providing more funding to support recommendations from the Rapid Recovery Plan to help Great Road. 19 is to create incentives for businesses to install EV chargers in their parking lots for their customers. 20 would be to update the Complete Streets Plan, which was created about 10 years ago and needs some updates. And then 21 would be to develop a public art plan. Public art can support economic development and help businesses attract customers, and this would be an effort to explore the best way to do that here in Acton. Under public health response, there's a need to improve air quality in our public facilities by making major retrofits to our HVAC systems. If you recall, the CARES Act funding, which we received $2 million, they had a cap of $150,000 for capital improvements to buildings. So it really limited our ability to make some changes to our HVAC systems that we needed to make. We did what we could within that cap, but there's a need to do more. 23 would be responsive to select board goals to add more licensed social worker positions to the organization and help oversee social service programs. 24 would be to provide an outdoor learning spaces for the 6 schools that the district operates besides the new twin school, which is going to have outdoor learning spaces built as part of its construction. 25 is public health. 25 and 26 are public health services and supplies and things related to our continued response to COVID-19 and the mitigation measures that we continue to have to take. 27, the school district is looking at social emotional screeners and curriculum. 28 would be to increase access to public health information, help with outreach and engagement with the population. 29 is to provide a more permanent way to provide curbside service. It turned out to be a very successful experiment for the libraries to provide curbside, and there's some equipment that would help facilitate that being a more permanent feature that we offer. 30, if you parked behind Town Hall, you notice that we've taken up 6 spots or so with an outdoor meeting space that we found very helpful to meet with members of the public or contractors or other folks that don't want to come into the building. And we'd like to move that to the space next to the finance department, which you know where that is, right along Woodbury, and so we can tap those parking spaces back. 31 would be to look at best practices and create a manual for pandemic responses. Equity-focused services, there's over $2 million in needs identified there. A big one would be to construct and rehabilitate affordable housing units in town. There's also a need from the school district to provide qualifying grants for tuition-free all-day kindergarten over 3 years, and then qualifying grants for tuition-free extended day programming, again, over 3 years. We wanted to continue the very successful emergency rental assistance programs that we've been operating over the last few years. The school district is looking at providing free after-school tutoring program, and they wanted funding for the food distribution program that they've been operating over the last year. We want to continue the child care subsidy. That's helped many families get back to work by providing a way for their children to be cared for. We want to look into some workshops and community-based training related to mental health, equity, and empathy. There's a select board goal related to P40, where we're looking to develop a youth council to facilitate more youth engagement in local government and provide expanded opportunities for participation and decisions being made at the local level. And then I think that it would be helpful to do a pilot program to try to find ways to improve access, universal access to the programs and facilities that we provide for recreational opportunities. We do a lot in that area, but I think there's needs to do more. Premium pay, we haven't provided any proposals in this category, and with any funding that's coming through a grant, there's always an allowance for administration, up to 10% in some cases that would be appropriate. In this case, we're looking to bring on some assistance with administrating and the procurement related to the $7 million worth of additional funding to manage, and then making sure that we have consulting and audit services, especially in place to help make sure we do this correctly. So those were the 43 needs that we've identified, and I think we released a survey today, and I quickly looked at it, and we've already received a few more ideas, and I expect that we'll get a lot of really good ones over the next few weeks. And this, again, the Select Board will continue to deliberate and discuss ideas, and over the next month, we hope to come up with a plan to invest this $7 million in a way that helps this community over the next 3 years, but sets us up for where we want to be after that. So there is one item that I wanted to touch on, which is related to revenue replacement. As I mentioned, the FY21 budget, we finished the year short of our revenue target in local receipts, which wasn't a problem operationally. We were able to deliver services and do everything we needed to do because we made a lot of, we took a lot of measures to turn back money and make sure everything worked out. But it does create an issue with us with DOR, because they will not let us carry that shortfall and then budget the same amount next year. So in other words, we level funded our revenue estimate from 21 to 22 in the current financial plan, and we need funding to cover that gap. Otherwise, the DOR will look at other ways to do that when we're doing our recap. So I tried to make it into bullets to explain it. So DOR requires that we budget revenue based on prior year actual. We level funded local receipts. It did not, okay. So, and ARPA funds, as I mentioned earlier, ARPA funds were designed for this very purpose. They were designed for government operations that need to maintain services but have interruptions in their revenues because of impacts from the pandemic. And I think that's a perfect way to describe what happened with our local receipts in 21. And so we asked the Select Board last night to actually consider making that decision right away and sort of taking the 400 off the top. And they said, well, wait a minute, why don't we see what the Finance Committee thinks, and then we'll reconsider after we hear any feedback from the Finance Committee. So I wanted to pose that to you tonight and see if you had any thoughts on that, or if you want to table that and talk about the 43 other things. It's up to you. I just want, that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, I think that we probably would like to go ahead and discuss the $400,000 gap, and unless I hear an objection, I think we'll maybe start there. Okay. Jason.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds almost, it's a fine splitting of the hair. On the one hand, we're not allowed to use any of these funds to reduce taxes, but this is a fine opportunity for us to reduce the amount that we would have spent while still being under the legal definition of what they're of how we're to use this money. Correct? Am I reading that correctly?
I mean, to further expand, I think where you're going is we have excess levy capacity as part of the financial plan. That excess levy capacity will not survive the recap process if there's a deficit in local receipts. So, yes.
So this is like the one opportunity for us to take $400,000 out of a $7 million bucket and use it as the one component that would qualify potentially as some form of tax relief while still being kosher and allowed in the eyes of this plan. Correct?
We certainly wouldn't write it up that way.
Well, of course. But that's the crux of it. Money's fungible. So this is the $400,000 that is an otherwise, that as long as we take it off the top now, we've protected that funds and tied it up, but protected it from potentially being used elsewhere. So by all means, I think taking it off the top is the right thing to do.
Steve.
Yeah, John, do you mind if I have Hannah York? We have Hannah York with us, who is our ARPA expert.
All right. Excellent.
Just wanted to make sure that my response to Jason checks out.
Yeah, so you're correct, and I think that an easier way to say it is, as opposed to it cutting taxes, we're keeping you from raising the tax rate.
Fair enough.
So I think that's the kind of the also safe to write it up that way.
It seems like
Statement
it's
as
the
well.
only way to do it, the only spot to do it, so by
Yeah.
all means, I think that should be taken off the top.
Well, glad to hear that. Now, can I ask a question? Okay. So the shortfall in local receipts, refresh my memory. Obviously, I can think of excise taxes, I can think of, meals taxes, I can think of a few things that would have been impacted by the pandemic. But, can you give me a rough breakdown of where the $400,000 was? And feel free to ask Mr. Barrett if you...
Yes. The Finance Director, Steve Barrett, can provide some details to that question.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay, or no? Yep. So as I reported, I think out August 3rd, our shortfall of about $400,000 was three key areas. Fees and permits, probably about $180. Excise tax was probably about $125,000. And then interest income was about $50,000. And I'm going off the top of my head, Steve, but it was kind of across the board in those three categories.
We weren't far off on meals taxes, I remember now, which surprised me.
Well, just to kind of jump in, the state set our budget for meals tax, and they told us what to use, and then they basically told us to use $280,000, and then they came in, they basically deposited 4 checks during the year, and I think it came out to $273. So they gave us a number we had to use, and then they filled up the glass.
Well, if only they were accurate on everything. All right, so, and the mechanism for closing this on the tax recap would be hitting the untaxed levy capacity, not free cash?
No, so as we moved through the last few months, we've been in discussion with Hannah York, our ARPA consultant, as well as the Department of Revenue. The way it looks right now is that we'll be able to count that $400,000 as a non-reoccurring local receipt on the tax recap. It gets a little bit in the weeds, but it is handled as a non-recurring local receipt. And as John said, by doing it this way, we can keep the untaxed levy capacity as it was in the ALG plan.
Thank you.
Roland?
Thanks, John. There's a lot of good ideas there that we'd spend the money. The Survey Monkey, is there a link on the town website?
Yes, on the homepage and the news flash item, there's a thing called community feedback, ARPA investments community feedback. And if you open that, there's a direct link to the survey. I can also email it to you afterwards.
Yeah, if you could do that. Is there a way to send that list that you presented to us tonight to the Finance Committee?
Sure. Yeah, in the presentation and the list is published at actonma.gov/ARPA.
Okay, great.
The presentation from last night, this list, and also the link to the survey.
Great. Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, thanks as well for the presentation. Just could you refresh me on when was the survey or this needs assessment done that you presented all the findings from just now?
So we've been working on it since probably July or August of this year as part of an internal working group.
Okay. I mean, because it struck me as a lot of the items were new to me, and that would make some sense if it was a newer effort. But, we also have, as you highlighted earlier, the capital improvement plan and a number of other initiatives. And items like, the sewer treatment center, I know we've talked over the years about a lot of investment needed in there, but I didn't see that necessarily captured in here. So I guess my question is how is the existing list of capital improvement projects, but more broadly, like what the town needs, how does that overlap with this list of what has been put together by this working group and is now being compiled from public feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of, at least my approach, and I believe the Select Board shares this with me, is that these are things that we want to try to invest in, things that we need, things that are in our capital plan, but also things that we may not have been able to find room for in our normal budget and capital planning process, things that were highlighted as concerns over the last few years in the area of mental health and wellness, and just new programs that we haven't been able to find ways to support. So with regard to sewer, we just received approval from town meeting for the investment to rehabilitate the wastewater treatment plant. We are looking at different ideas for whether Great Road is a project that we want to start talking about in the future. And so there is funding in here for feasibility money to start that conversation. But there isn't really too many other things that are ready to go in terms of to fund. I mean, the big ticket item was the extension across the Route 2 bridge for the new senior housing, which even that is pretty new. They just filed their comprehensive permit a few weeks ago, and the feasibility study that we started working on hasn't even been completed yet. But so those are emerging needs, and I think in some of the things that are in our 10-year capital plan are eligible. We could find eligibility ways to invest in them, and they're in here. They're in the 43.
Okay, yeah,
but
that's
it's not
great.
meant to be a perfect match.
Yeah, no, I understood completely, and I understand it's evolving as we go. But I mean, I'll just speak for myself. To me, the capital plan would be, in my view, a very high priority to fund this as much stuff as we can get in there, because we already know that we need it, rather than saying, here's additional ideas out there. And to that effect is, if we look forward the next 1 or 2 years, in theory, if there's a lot of these items that are already identified by the town as something they need, we wouldn't necessarily need them to be funded at town meeting, right? We're pulling forward that demand through an activity like this. And so there shouldn't technically really be a feasibility study like in the next year or two at a town meeting that we would need to approve, because it could be funded by an item like this, right?
It certainly will. It will offset needed investments from our 10-year capital plan, but it will also give us the opportunity to invest in things in year 2 that we didn't think we could fit in until year 5. For example,
Sure,
it would help us accelerate our 10-year planning to get the investments accomplished sooner.
Yeah, and I'll be a little crude here, but it's, for me, just taking a 10,000-foot view of this is if we say we're getting $7 million that we didn't have before. I'm not suggesting this is your approach, but what are ideas on how to invest this, to use a polite term, is there's all of a sudden a lot of priorities that bubble to the top. And if we look at the capital plan, the school's needs, et cetera, that we've identified pretty rigorously over a number of years, being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, I would think that those are much more thoroughly vetted than, public feedback on we would like this or we would like that. And that's just my crude sort of assessment of, and I hate to use the term found money, but it's like, hey, we have $7 million that we didn't have before. What are the desires for this? So I'm not looking for a response. It's just more of a comment.
Can I ask real quick, do you have any objections to the use of the 400,000?
Oh, no, I was following up on Roland's more broader comments. So.
Absolutely fine. Before we move on, and I do want to, no, not at all. I do want to discuss more in detail what's on the list. Does anybody at the table have any objections to using the $400,000 for the offset?
Madam Chair, would you entertain a motion?
I sure would.
You wrote it down.
Motion to strongly recommend to the Select Board to use $400,000 of the ARPA funds to recover previous year revenue shortfalls.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. I would definitely entertain further conversation on the list. And I'm going to start with people who haven't spoken yet, so go ahead, Christy.
Having only seen the list very quickly, it's hard to tell how much of that is similar to what Dave said, stuff that we were planning on doing anyhow, or stuff that got delayed from being done because of the pandemic happening. I mean, clearly there are things like PPE and aid for essential workers type things that aren't in there. The HVAC, I know those systems have been, well, I've heard about them since I've been on this committee. I would love to have a stronger understanding of which items those are, because otherwise it can seem like, what are some cool things we can do with this money, or stuff we wouldn't have had before, as opposed to the idea of this money being a way for us to fill in gaps and help revitalize the area from damage done. I have to say, I'm disappointed to see a park on the list in a place that we were told was only going to be a $21,000 dog park. I will let go of that one at some point. And I'm curious about the sewer connection to the AHA property, what the long-term cost benefits are to the town or not. I don't know how the systems work for the Acton Housing Authority and what we pay for that specifically, but it's got to be quite expensive to get sewer there. I'm wondering more of a long-term look. Is there a benefit to us doing this now as opposed to further down the line? Or is it just because we have this money now, we can do it now?
Well, no, it's because the reason that this project was even discussed was because we had some land use ideas for the parcel dog park. For example, the select board made it a top priority to identify a way to build a park in between the dog park and the other park, which is why we're recommending investment there. But the fact that there's a new housing development going on there, that they're going to have to build a huge wastewater treatment facility that may require a mounded system. And the land use decisions that would be dictated from that made it a good idea, from my opinion, to get a grant to do a feasibility study of bringing sewer across the bridge, which is what we did. We got a grant for it. The project is nearly completed. And if it comes in at a number that's more reasonable and the town supports moving forward with it, it would not only provide a way to connect that project, but it would give us the opportunity in the future to connect the PSF when that system fails, which isn't anytime soon, but it sort of takes that out of the way. And in terms of doing it now versus doing it later, it's always much more expensive to do it later.
Yes and no. There is inflation and other things that come into line, and the argument that we should do something now doesn't, that it'll cost more later doesn't mean we should always do it now in general. I still don't understand long-term cost of doing this. I'm not talking about the cost of if we did it later, but is it more cost-effective to have sewer there than to have this system? It sounds like it's possibly a highly expensive system to put in the septic, so there's a balance out there. And I see you're saying there's the benefit of being able to hook in the PSF rather than having to replace that septic. Are there other costs we're avoiding by putting a sewer in? I'm worrying about long-term cost benefit.
We're not spending the money to put the system in. The Housing Authority is. This would be a way to support that effort and support affordable housing, which is a goal of the state and the town, and a way to bring infrastructure to an area that doesn't currently have it. In terms of operational costs, they would become a sewer customer and pay sewer bills, and that wouldn't cost us anything. It would actually bring revenue in. So having a system on there wouldn't cost us anything. Having a treatment system wouldn't cost us anything, and they would have to just do normal maintenance that you do to a treatment system. Does that answer your question?
By treatment system, you mean a septic?
A septic system,
Okay.
sorry, septic
Okay.
system.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I think if we had a sewer system at that site 2 years ago, you could bet there wouldn't be a dog park going in there tomorrow. It'd be because it is based on its location and size, or it could have been a viable commercial opportunity rather than a dog park and public recreation space. I think that putting sewer, an expensive sewer in there, because you have to go over Route 2 to access that site, it's kind of ludicrous, since the housing department already budgeted for a septic system. I'd rather use sewer funds to improve Route 2A, because they are very in need. They are in need of well, the lack of adequate sewer on 2A prevents business growth. It prevents restaurants from moving in. Some of those apartment houses along 2A are aging, and their septic systems are at fast approaching the end of life, and they're going to have to come up with a solution there. But I think the priority for sewer needs to be Route 2A versus the senior housing. But this plan is nice, but as David said, I would, and others, I think that our capital plan should be the first list that you look at in applying this $7 million worth of funds. And if there's money left over, then we can look at some of the other nice-to-have opportunities. But I think our priority should be with your 10-year capital plan and addressing some of those issues and other infrastructure issues that have been deferred or delayed. I just think we get more bang for the buck. Anyway.
I'm pleased to report that I think a lot of the items in here are in the capital plan. I would say half, if not near it.
Adam?
The 40-plus item priority list is provisional at this point, is that correct? Or is it final?
It's just the results of a needs assessment. It's not in order of priority. It's not in order of anything other than, I think, value, dollar value.
Right, so things can be added and removed as
Can I
well?
Yes.
Since you came a few minutes late, so there's going to be, that was the first presentation, there's going to be a listening session. There's going to be another review by the select board, and then they'll consider final, so that's where we are.
Thank you, that's the part I missed.
Okay, I thought so. Go ahead.
Let's see if I can remember where I was going with my questions, the rest of my
Good luck.
questions. The items that are currently on the priority list, which are FTEs and new programs that are services with costs associated, and I see some of them have 3-year lifespans, will those remain on the books, or will they be complete after 3 years?
Yeah, so I think in the proposals as written, they would be seen as ways to start these programs, and within 3 years, they'd be worked into the budget or not, but I think that these would be startup funding for them.
Okay.
Isha?
I had a question about the social worker line item. There was a 300K line item for a town social worker. Was that for one social worker or multiple social workers?
That's for one over 3 years.
Ah, I see, okay,
Sorry, I should have said that in the list.
okay, thank you.
Roland?
Doing some of the school upgrades with the phone systems and things like that, I think that would benefit the town. HVAC upgrades, obviously, would like to see more data on what that entails, et cetera, what things are being considered. And hopefully they'll be more efficient than what we have now. And if the sewer line, I agree with Mike that something needs to be done with 2A. But also, if you did do the line, the town decided to go with that option up Main Street to an affordable housing, I would urge the town at that point to go all the way to the public safety building, so that you're not scrambling later on saying, oh, geez, now we're going to add the line there. It might just be more cost effective to go up the couple hundred feet, not even a couple, maybe 100 feet or so, more up further, so that it's right there. When that time comes, you tie into it and go. Versus, okay, now we get rid of the street again and put the line in and what have you. So I'm just thinking that's something I know one thing we talked about before, I guess it's going back maybe about 2 years, was that the public safety building is going to need an HVAC upgrade. At that time, I mentioned looking at geothermal for that site, if it could be possible. So I think they know that might be where we need to invest some money, and that this might be a good option to do that.
Steve?
So I'm not going to comment on any of the 43 things individually, but I am interested in the process. I'm sure the American Rescue Plan is written in absolutely plain English that anybody can understand, but how are we vetting these in terms of eligibility? Are we going to have town council go through every idea that's put forward to, ascertain that it's eligible, as we do with CPA projects, or just how are we going to do this, John?
So we have experience with that from CARES, which in CARES, actually, the Treasury had its rules and regs, and then the state came in and put even more rules and regs on top of that. So we have experience navigating that. We've worked with Hannah to help us on a regular basis. We also are setting up an internal process. We're doing a 250. What are we doing? 250 word.
Yeah, so I can give you just kind of a brief background on it. The interim final rule that the Treasury put out, I believe, is 140-some pages long.
If I could interrupt, interim final.
Yeah, it's interim final. So
It's exactly the kind of thing I was worried about.
That's exactly, that was going to be my next point, is it is still interim. It was put out back in June, I believe late June, and given a 90-day window for a comment period. So they should be coming out with the final rule. I don't know why they didn't just call it interim rule, not, it's the feds. So that's come out. We've gone through it extensively. I'm also working with I'm actually working with some of the big counties on doing their programs as well and doing compliance and reporting on it. So what we're looking at right now first is we've been working as a team to put together a application, not an application, but basically a project request form for the departments to use. And what they're going to need to do in order to get them fully approved and set up and all that is, and this flows into how we have to report it to the feds, is a 50 to 250 word description of the project, how it ties into the category. We have to define the category. Within the 4 main categories, how it gets reported in the portal to the Treasury is there's probably 45 categories. So we have to define the subcategory, and then depending on which one you choose, there's additional reporting requirements. So the idea is we're putting together a project departmental request form, gathering the data we need to report on it up front. So number one, we can see if there's enough information to determine if it is eligible or not. And then also having the data readily available, that when it comes time to report, we're not trying to run around and talk to people and gather the information at that time. And I believe the process then is also going to be when someone comes up with something new, the team vets it, and then they'll decide whether or not to put it up as a project.
And as a follow-up question, John, since you've kind of now thrown it open to the citizenry to make suggestions, is there any way to triage the requests that come in? Are you going to look at each one of them individually and go through the whole process, or are you going to just say some things just on the top of it just don't look eligible or don't look like a good idea? Or how are you going to handle that?
Right, so I think with the feedback that we'll be getting, and the select board has already started receiving since last night emails saying we think you should do this, we think you should do that, I think we'll gather all that and identify where 6 or 7 comments are really asking for the same thing, and then figure out if it's an eligible use. I'll be planning to report out to the board at the October 4th meeting, kind of a summary of where we're at, what we've received for feedback. If we've received 100 things, I'll say, we received 100 things, we think 75 of them are probably eligible, or, for example. And then let the board decide how they want to incorporate those 75 things into the 43 that we already have on the table. And many of them, I suspect, will be similar, or around the same categories and concepts, and maybe I suspect it'll improve the 43 things and make them more robust proposals from all the feedback that we get from people.
Well, I applaud the outreach effort. I sympathize that it's going to take up a lot of time.
Jason.
Just a couple other process questions. I don't want to go through the 42. I'll save that for email instead. That said, however, the one administrative question on the topic of administrative work, would that be a full-time, long-term hire, or would that be a contract-only position?
So the procurement officer is something that I've been trying to work into the organization since I got here, and I see this as an opportunity to bring the person on for this purpose and then find a way to keep them here afterwards.
I understand thank you for saying that, but I'd like to echo what I think somebody else mentioned earlier. My knee-jerk reaction is to avoid funding long-term permanent positions with one-time money, which is what this is going to be. As a process question, have you had any discussions with your counterpart in Boxborough for the 85-15 standard split for the initiatives that are going to the school district, so that we get the same type of revenue split that we normally do when working on all things school?
Well, we've exchanged emails with the interim town administrator there. They have a transition underway right now in Boxborough. I work very closely with Peter Light, the superintendent, and I work closely to understand the needs that they have there. I understand the tradition and the financial necessity for an 85-15 split for most everything else we do. In this particular case, I don't think it's a requirement. It's certainly a best practice that any investments we make are shared in that fashion. But I don't know that Boxborough agrees with that. We do the requests that you see in here that say they'll have parentheses A, B, R, S, D request. Those actually are 85% of what they asked for. So, for example, qualifying grants for tuition-free extended day programming over 3 years, I think they asked for 600.
So they did the 85% ask in advance?
I did.
You did it. Okay, great. Good. So yes, you did do the 85-15 split.
But I can't guarantee that Boxborough agrees with that.
Obviously, I understand that.
So.
But great, you did exactly what I hoped you'd do, which is pay attention to that 85-15 split, and then hope that our brethren next door follow suit and hold up their end of the bargain.
Jason, hold on one second. We're going to get a little more detail.
So I've had conversations with a member of the Boxborough Select Board. It's a little complicated here, right? So if we were to do the 85-15 split, both towns have to agree on the exact same list while we're mixing in whatever else we're mixing in and having it all total to what each of our totals is. I mean, it's not required, right? So, for example, I mean, it's not precluded either, right? We could go that way, but we could, for example, Acton could choose to fund the phone system and all-day K, and Boxborough could choose to fund the food program and the outdoor learning spaces, right? Or whatever is an equitable distribution, unless everybody thought that it was really important that it come down to the, the exact decimal point as to the because it's not, we say 1585, but it's not even exactly 1585.
And it changes, it's on a rolling average of the last 3 years. Yes, I understand. But I'm glad to hear that it's being discussed. So no, I don't need it to be to the decimal place. I don't need it to be on a line item basis. I just want to make sure that we're not doing this in a vacuum of the responsibility that Boxborough shares for that school district.
Yeah, it'll just be a little complicated as to what we do. And so we may have to either agree to choose on the same list and then make sure all our other things add up to the remaining, do we take some money off the top for the school district and then split it 85-15 and then use the remaining funds to fund the other priorities? Or do we agree to say, you fund X, Y, and Z and we'll fund A, B, and C?
Yeah, I don't envy you that task either, but I do think that it's a conversation worth having, because if you look at the amount of money that we normally spend in a given year, from a taxpayer perspective, this is not even close to the balance of what we normally spend as a taxpayer for the school requirements versus the town requirements. This is way more heavily towards the municipal side, which may be a happy accident for a town like Acton that's in a regional school district versus other towns where the first handout would be the school district. The school district's hands are somewhat tied here because they're dependent upon what the town decides to give to the school district. And I think that we need to be very cautious and cognizant of the fact that this is not going to be the same split between school and municipal that normally happens.
But we want to be equitable with the school district as well. It's just complicated.
Understood. Understood. And the rest of my comments are specific line items. I'll take them offline. Thank you.
Go ahead, Adam.
John, are there any items on the capital improvement program list that are not eligible for the ARPA funds?
Yes.
Is it? Would you say there are more items on the CIP that are eligible than are not eligible?
Well, building a new public works facility would not be eligible, for example.
The next question I was going to ask.
Constructing sidewalks, just basically funding our sidewalk replacement program, in general, would not be eligible. There is, I believe, an opportunity to target specific sidewalk sections that are related to economic development projects, but, within the capital plan, there are a lot of things in there. Vehicle purchases, I don't know that those would really be eligible. There's a lot of that in the capital plan. Fire trucks, things like that, ambulances. So I don't know the exact breakdown, but we tried to incorporate in the 43 items as many items from the capital plan as we could.
Thank you.
Jason?
Just to follow up from that, one of the things I wrote down, I think that sidewalks should definitely count not only as economic development, but in some cases it should qualify as equity. So that's, I don't want to be creative, I don't want to run afoul of the rules, but definitely think that we should consider that as an opportunity too.
Yeah, I agree.
So could you just do me a favor and tell me a little more about what you meant by a rec facility between the dog park and the senior housing?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the select board established a goal, and I believe it was something to the effect of coordinate the design of the dog park and create they basically wanted us to work on a way to make the area in between the dog park and the senior housing facility something, an amenity of some type that isn't just a wasteland and a bunch of fences. And so we want to have a thoughtful and comprehensive design that starts now, like not after they already designed the housing and the dog park, but starts now so that we can say, all right, if we're going to do this over here and that over there, and we want something like appropriate here, what's the design process look like? Let's get someone on board to start working on it rather than doing it after the fact.
Okay, so I didn't go to you in a second. One thing that I'm sensing is there were community members who were interested in things like a community center, which we're now thinking for the Ace of Barland House, which I personally love as an idea, and other things they identified that they thought were lacking in the community. And I'm wondering if this recreation center, David, are you guys moving along this line because that answers a community need? Would you mind expounding upon that?
So two things about the area between the dog park and the housing development. One of the things that's been suggested, and people have spoken to a number of members of the select board, various people in town, is to have some kind of senior-oriented park. And there are specific kinds of equipment you could put there, but maybe not worth going into today. I believe it actually would not be a hugely expensive park. It depends on what we decide to do. But anyway, that's one idea for that area. And with regard to the community center, I'm not sure that there would be enough room in that space, if that's what you're saying.
No, not at all. No, in fact, I really appreciate that we're mentioning cultural center, community center as part of the Ace of Barland House. I'm really speaking to the broad desires to see things in Acton that the community members thought were missing, and I wondered if this was part of covering that, but it sounds like it's a whole other thing if you're talking about a senior park, senior-focused
a senior park, which has been a request for some years, and having it next to the senior housing seems appropriate. So it's just an idea, but it's been brought up by a number of people to a number of members of the select board separately.
Okay. All right, thanks for just giving more detail. Sure, go ahead, John.
Just, it says facilities, that doesn't mean buildings.
Yeah, I was
It
curious
means like
about that.
Gazebos and, not,
Not,
Yeah.
yeah, we're not talking about, yeah, I wondered when you first mentioned it, but hearing what you're saying, that's not the case. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, with regard to that, to that space that we're talking about, the dog park area, I know the dog park committee doesn't have enough money to design that, at least the area, the landscaping, that the way at least it should be. When you come into the town of Acton off of Route 2, the first thing you look at is that site. So I think it really needs to be, really need to pay careful attention to, the impression that the people get when they arrive in town. I just think it's very important that architecturally and from a landscape point of view that it's done correctly. And I think what you're proposing and the select board is proposing really is a good idea, because it needs to be well coordinated and make a statement that, welcome to town, and it's got to really look outstanding. That is one of the most important sites in our community, and you need to make a good impression on the community and the visitors. So that's a good idea.
Okay, any further comments? Yes, Christy.
I have a request for, I'm hoping we'll get to see the next round of this list. And at that time, I would love to see which of these items were already in the SIP, whatever that version of the list ends up having, so that we have an idea of how much of this fits in with the previous planning. Because with the list going by that quickly, it's hard for us to tell. I'd also like to know which of the things are specific pandemic fallout. Some of them were obvious items, but things that we wouldn't have had to deal with if there hadn't been the pandemic. And I would love to have a way to understand, if it's not directly spelled out, which items are taking on long-term costs, such as the employees Jason was talking about. So it's not just this is a one-time thing, but this is starting a new item that we're going to have to keep maintaining, or a new department role, whatever.
I'm happy to go through those right now, but rather than doing it in a few weeks.
I would love to see it with the final list. Do you think the final list will be that different?
So the process that we're going to follow is there'll be a public hearing next Monday where the board will listen to any and all ideas, and then there'll be kind of a recap meeting on the 4th where there'll be a recalibration of the list, which I'd invite you to attend that night if you're interested. It's also a virtual meeting where we'll be discussing the updated list, and then the board is intending to make a vote on a recommended investment plan on the 18th. So I think, but I can go through and answer your questions about which ones are on the capital plan and which ones are related to the pandemic and which ones are the other thing.
It would be a lot easier for me if I could see the list in its entirety. If you can just email it, I can.
It's right on the website, yep. This list is right on the website, actonma.gov/ARPA.
Okay, so would you mind sending us basically that breakdown with with that list annotated with what's long-term and what's already on the CIP?
I think
Sure.
he's saying we need to discuss it now if we're going to discuss it before the select board.
You just want to know what on that list is already on the CIP and what on that list is a longer term, right?
Yes, and what's specifically just dealing with the pandemic.
Yes. So we're just asking for that to be emailed to us.
Okay.
Is that doable?
Yeah, I'm happy to, I have all kinds of time right now. I'm happy to go through the whole thing with you.
The problem right now is that because none of us have it in front of us, we'd have to write it down as you wrote it out, or as you spelled it out to us. And at this point, I don't think we want to debate what's on the list so much as just understand it better. And then if we have more thoughts about it, email you about those list items. Is that correct?
Well said.
So I do appreciate that you're willing to go through with the time right now. But we'd have to just write everything down. Right
Madam
now.
Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Do you want us to direct our comments to you or directly to the town manager?
I guess what I would ask, on the off chance that we have similar questions on the same items. If everybody could get me questions by the end of the week, I will put them all together and forward them on to you. So, yes, Dave.
And a follow-up for John is, the schedule you've outlined here, is this is just what the select board have put together as a schedule, is sort of their deadline internally, or is there like some internal deadlines as far as the federal funding or state DOR or whatever that information has to be submitted?
No, this is just the schedule that the select board approved for how the process will go for the ARPA funding. The timing is such that it'd be helpful to have the plan and the recommendations for how to invest the funding behind us as we enter the budget process.
Yeah, I guess I appreciate that. Just looking at it, though, is 5 weeks to how do we spend $7 million seems like a relatively aggressive timeline, particularly if there's a lot of, we're the first time we're seeing all of this, and we want to digest this a little bit and look over exactly the documentation and do some, at least, thinking on our own. I guess I would ask the select board if there's flexibility around this timeline, understanding that there's a budget season and there's a lot of other moving pieces with town meeting and everything else around the corner effectively, but it does seem rather aggressive for us to turn this around, and frankly, almost a moment's notice of understanding this and getting.
Feedback on Monday, and it's Tuesday here.
Yeah.
It's
This is the first time we're seeing this.
right, but we have the public comment period is a full month, which ends on the 13th. And the Finance Committee members are invited to submit comments individually, or if you'd like to submit them as a group, that's up to the chair, I suppose. And you already saw how quickly $7 million go, so it may feel like a rapid process, but I think it's a process that we should do and do it thoughtfully, which, as I mentioned, we have been working on this for a few weeks. It went live last night, and we think it encompasses a lot of the priorities that have already been approved by the Select Board, which is the chief executive officers of the town, and we want to try to accomplish those this year and as soon as we can. And, I'm happy to follow up individually with folks if you have questions, or I'll get you the spreadsheet with, I'm coming up with some symbols to use for each of the
Thank you.
Christie's things. We can get that to you.
Great.
I think 4 weeks is a good amount of time to work on this.
And just for the approval, just to be clear, it's the select board directing you to submit certain applications with help, et cetera, for certain projects, right? There's no town meeting needed, technically speaking. You don't necessarily need to solicit public input or anything along those lines, do you?
Right. There's no requirement to do this. I think the select board could have said last night, we want to spend $7 million on
Sure.
X, and it could have. But I think it wants to take a thoughtful and deliberate process, understanding the needs that we already know about and any others that come from the community, and then make a decision to help invest in the community.
Just kind of a comment to add to that is, and my understanding from the meetings that I've been in with the town, and this is a recommendation really for all the clients that I'm working with, this isn't what they are going to be looking at on October 18th isn't a hard and fast list of, this is exactly how we're going to spend the money. This is like a high level, this is my, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is this is a high level, like these are our needs assessment, this is what we're aiming at. But over the next 3 years, COVID could change, other things could pop up, and I think there still would be, within the allowance of the grant, the ability to pivot and adjust if things arose that needed to be. I think one of the reasons to try and get moving on this is some of the projects are longer term and more extensive multi-year projects that you need to make sure and get spent because the funds are only through December 31st, 2024. So I think there's kind of that balance of we need to get at least an outline of what is going to happen quickly and get some of those long-term projects started, and then other things could fall into place over the next 2 years.
Yeah, just forgive me for brutally summarizing that, but it sounds like the select board has given themselves a deadline of 5 weeks to determine how to spend $7 million, but you don't necessarily need to spend it until 3¼ years have passed. Is like, why be so aggressive with that timeline? And I understand there's a lot of other budgetary stuff going along, but just my view is I don't think I could be as thoughtful as I'd like to be in determining how to spend money with a priority list of 45 or 43 items or whatever it is, and getting constant input from the town. I mean, just for example, the dog park committee met for years to determine what to do with the dog park, and that was a fraction of this amount of money. It just seems aggressive. That's my view.
Did you have something to say?
May I make a comment, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
There's a number of things here, as the town manager has said, that relate to priorities that we're doing. And it, be it the Asa Parlin House, be it that little park between the dog park and the housing authority, you can actually go through and there's quite a few things that are related. And there are similar things on the school side. We can't delay for months in this fiscal year and address those priorities, right? We can figure out a month, but if we're going to address some of those priorities that we've put together, we have to find a way to do those things, right? And so it's wonderful that we have the ARPA money, and it allows us to do some things that we might not have otherwise done. It also allows us to cover some costs that we didn't know where we would get the money. For example, the renovation to the Asa Parlin House, or the matching funds required to remove the dam. We expect to get another grant there, but we don't expect the grant to cover the entire cost, right? So there are many things there, and we have to weigh these also with the other constituents, right? So and coordinate with Boxborough, coordinate with the school district, get input from the public, get input from you guys, and weigh all those things together. One way you guys could consider doing it is in a process similar to the way you weigh your CPC recommendations, is to go through the list and vote on them. I'm just an idea, or you can just give random thoughts. But I think it's important, if you want to do it, to try to squeeze in, I don't know whether you had another meeting scheduled for this month, but to squeeze in a meeting between now and October 4th, and definitely before October 18th. Yes. But because we're going to ask the town manager to probably put together a final-ish list on the 4th.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, to Dave's point, Dave Wellinghoff, yeah, it does seem rushed that we're spending $7 million over. We're determining how to spend $7 million over a few weeks. We've been known to spend a lot more time over a lot less money. However, in this case, I don't know how we do the budget for next year in the forecast in the ALG plan for the next couple of years without knowing how this money is going to be spent. Maybe not down to the last dollar, but generally how it's going to be spent. So I do think it needs to be done as quickly as we can get it done, just so that we have a set of knowns going into the budget and planning cycle, because otherwise we're going to be, well, maybe we'll get the money from here, maybe we'll get the money from there, or maybe we shouldn't do it at all. So it would be good to determine how we think we're going to spend this $7 million in broad terms before we get to that point of the budget.
Jason?
Madam Chairman, I recommend you give us homework. I want us all to have, every single one of us, to have given to you yes, no, maybe so on each of these items by the time we meet in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we're scheduled to meet on the 28th. I'd like, if you have questions about any of the items on this list, for you to have submitted them to me so that I can get feedback from the town manager and we can have a better understanding of each of these items that we possibly have questions about. And then we'll go down the list and we will decide what we would like prioritized from our point of view at the 28th meeting. So please be prepared for that.
You could stack rank.
Yeah, we could.
So each of them, you put each order,
Stack rank.
everybody, but in order to do that, you need to have that list in Excel so we could,
Yep.
yeah. No, but you could do at least like 3 groups or whatever.
Yep, so we
Or
will,
4 groups, you
we
can do
will at least have our opinions more defined sorry, I'm looking at, September 28th. Right. Thank you very much for bringing this to us and for your time.
Good, thank you for your feedback, and I look forward to more of it as we go through this process. Thanks.
Anytime you want to bring us $7 million.
Well, you spent 400 before we got through the first 5 minutes of the meeting.
Thank you. All right. Next item on our list is our point of view. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to cover that this evening. So along with going through the list at our next meeting, we're absolutely going to have to go through the point of view in a lot of detail. So be prepared for a more lengthy meeting next time. Finance Committee business. Has everybody had a chance? Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to do liaison reports.
I was going to just approve the minutes first.
The agenda.
And then,
Did you get my corrections?
I did. So I have amendments from Jason. Do I have any other amendments for the meeting minutes for July 13th? Excellent. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes of July 14th as amended.
13th.
13th as amended.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Now I will take liaison reports. Go ahead, Jason.
A couple of changes on the new twin school side. The first thing is not necessarily financial, but they have settled on a name that they're going to take to the school committee. The recommended name is going to be the Boardwalk Campus for the twin schools. The way that the current twin school is in the Parker Damon building, this would be the Gates and Douglas schools on the Boardwalk Campus. That leads me into the first thing that's of interest to everyone else. The boardwalk is complete and has now been turned back over to the public. So if you're crossing from Indian Village over to True West, you can use the boardwalk again. So that's good. From a financial perspective, the overall cost for the project has been ratcheted down a couple of $1 million to reconcile the cost savings that were made by doing the early bid packages. However, the amount that the overall project amount has been winnowed down in the eyes of the MSBA as well. That said, the savings that we're currently reflecting, we're still holding in contingency. So we're not guaranteed to have the total project cost come down yet. We're worried about form fit and FF&E form fit and equipment. We might use some of that contingency for the FF&E on the other side. But the good news is the maximum dollar amount has come down, and that can't be changed. So. From a budget perspective, we're actually mildly under budget from the original numbers that you all heard. From a schedule perspective, we're not behind yet, but there is a new worry. The 2 main heating units that are supposed to go on top of the building, which are being custom built in Germany, are now significantly delayed. We were supposed to have received them in October. We're not going to receive them until February. So they are going to do a temporary way of heating the building once it is sealed so that they can continue working on the inside, but the permanent heating has been delayed by some number of months, and they're blaming it all on COVID and general supply chain and the rest of that. So while the official schedule is not in jeopardy yet, I'm nervous, and you can tell that they're nervous because that was the first thing brought up in the last meeting. Thank you, that's all I have.
If I could add to that.
Go ahead.
So one additional update on the budget that was mentioned was that there is a FEMA eligibility for COVID-related costs. The school committee is still trying to figure out, or the school district is still trying to figure out if that'll be approved. If denied, the impact to the future E&D reserves will be over 600K. And they just wanted to bring that to our attention, so.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Noon? Roland? Adam? Christie?
I attended the RECC meeting, Regional Emergency Control Center, I believe it is. And at this point, they're still fairly in the planning stages. They were talking about the job description for the director who will, the person who will run it, and I believe also for the person who will project manage bringing the center online. Interesting discussion about the education requirements for the jobs. Apparently current dispatchers do not need more than a GED or a high school degree. And there's a discussion about whether the person who would be running it would need a bachelor's degree or not. And they were saying, in some ways, you'd rather have someone who had significant relevant experience than someone who just had a bachelor's degree. And they are meeting again in a month.
Excellent. Mike? Excellent. Dave?
Wait, do you have anything from ALT?
Hold on a second. You? Oh, well, not yet. I'm just gonna, the free cash, ALG met, the free cash estimates are between 3.7 and 4.3 million. The town manager related that the town is restaffing some positions that they had delayed filling during the pandemic. So they just hired 4 firefighters, 2 police officers, some planning staff and public works staff. And that's all the school turnbacks were 1.2 million. And they are concerned about their revolving funds for things like their kindergarten, food services, and community education, all things which suffered deeply during the pandemic. And I think some of that ended up on the list that we just got from Mr. Mangiaratti. So specific pandemic-related costs that we may want to bubble up higher on the list when we consider it. That is all I have. Again, be prepared for a longer meeting next time. Christie?
Could we please have the ALG spreadsheet before the next meeting so we can look at the list with the idea of the forecast?
Yes,
in mind?
absolutely. And Isha?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Good night, all. Thank you.